What's up everyone, and welcome to my Kinich guide. As usual, we'll go over all things you need to know on how to best build Kinich. Let's keep this intro short and get right into the guide. So Kinich is a Dendro DPS and his kit heavily revolves around his skill. It's a skill that can be used to traverse the open world, however it can also be used in combat and attached to enemies. Upon attaching, Kinich will have 0 Night Soul points, yet he'll gain these points over time for each second his hook is attached. One hook to enemies, you can move around them, and when he enters the Night Soul Blessing state, Kinich's normal attacks will fire loop shots at enemies as you rotate around them. Firing loop shots also generates Night Soul points. While moving around, you'll notice these highlighted areas. These are called blind spots. If Kinich enters this area, he gains even more Night Soul points, and the spot will disappear. With this, it's clear that Kinich has many ways to accrue Night Soul points, and this is actually for a very special reason, that being his special attack, where when Kinich's Night Soul points are at max, holding his skill will cause him to unleash a cannon shot. Firing this shot will consume all of his Night Soul points, thus when you play him, your main goal is to hook on enemies, perform his loop shots, and gain Night Soul points so you can fire off his cannon shot as much as possible. This is further aided by his first passive talent, where if enemies are hit with Burgeon or Burning, Kinich will gain 7 Night Soul points every 0.8 seconds. For Kinich's burst, he'll summon a How on field, and doing so will have a How passively attack enemies with AoE Dendro damage. This is great for dealing additional damage to enemies or damaging enemies that are not attached to Kinich's hook. A nice bonus of his burst is that if it's used while Kinich is in the Night Soul Blessing state, the state will be increased by a good amount. For his final passive, when Kinich's teammates trigger a Night Soul burst, it will gain stacks called Hunter's Experience. These stacks increase his cannon shot by an absurd amount, where each stack increases the damage of his attack by 320% of Kinich's attacks. Kinich can gain 2 of these stacks, so he can have his shot increased by 640% of his attack. Because of the crazy scaling of this passive, it's going to be a big role in his damage and how you build him, but before that, when you're leveling up his talents, first level up his skill, as this is the ability that counts for his loop shots and his cannon shot, and this is where most of his damage is going to come from. Next, prioritize his burst to have a How deal more damage, and then finally comes his normal attacks. Now let's go over which claymores are going to be the best to use on Kinich. Starting with his number 1 claymore, it's going to be his signature, the Fang of the Mountain King. Initially, this weapon may seem odd since it barely gives a crit rate boost, but that's because the weapon's true strength lies with its high base attack and passive. These two things are key, as the high base attack is going to directly play into Kinich's final passive, which is the one that massively increases his skill damage based on his attack. Then the weapon's passive is going to grant a really nice damage bonus to his skill and burst, since the stack of the passives are easy to gain. Thankfully, however, because of his attack increasing passive, there are still other claymores that are actually really good on him. For instance, the Wolf's Gravestone. Because of the claymore's huge increase to attack, it's an exceptional claymore to use and one you most likely already have. Very similar to this is going to be the Unforged. While a shield is required to maximize its passive, it still gives tons of attack and thus is still very good. Equally great are going to be crit based weapons, the best of them being the Beacon of the Reed Sea. This claymore is easily one of Kinich's top weapons since it gives him everything he wants. It has crit rate while also giving him 40% attack through its passive. While not as strong, there is also Navia's signature claymore, the Verdict. Or on the other hand, if you actually have enough crit rate, you could go for the Red Horn. As for 4 stars, generally the Serpent Spine is going to be his best, giving crit rate and damage percent. The only downside to this option is that Kinich won't likely be played with the Shielder, so actually the damage percent passive won't be used to its max and you may not actually have that much, but nonetheless it's still a really good claymore to use. There's also the Talking Stick, and actually this claymore is very similar to the Serpent Spine. Outside of these two, you should opt for attack-based weapons, a prime choice being the new craftable Earthshaker. To put it simply, it's sort of like a 4-star version of his signature weapon. Here you get a good amount of attack while also getting a damage buff to his skill. Other great claymores are the Fontaine craftable claymore, the Tidal Shadow, the Lithic Blade, and even the luxurious Sea Lord can be pretty good. For those in early game, you can use either the Debate Club or the Blood Tainted Greatsword. Let's now get into the best artifact sets to use on Kinich, and the overall best set is gonna be the Obsidian Codex. Its 2-piece grants an outright damage increase, which is really nice, and then its 4-piece is absolutely broken. It gives you an absurd 40% crit rate. How this was greenlit in Hoyoverse, I have no idea, but with the 4-piece you get tons of crit rate to not only make building him so much easier and have him very consistent in his damage, with it you're able to just focus on crit damage and stack as much of it on him as possible. Really, this set is way too good and will allow him to hit like a truck, but if need be, the Unfinished Reverie is also a very good set. The 4-piece may seem confusing, but essentially, Kinich's damage will be increased by an amount when he leaves the field, and this increase is 50%. This 50% will either decrease or gradually return to 50, depending on whether there are burning enemies on the field, of which is Kinich's main reaction. This big damage increase lends to the set being surprisingly strong. However, this set is very limited to its stacks. At max stacks, the damage is really nice, but you're probably not going to be at max stacks all the time, so the Reverie won't be as consistent as the Obsidian Codex, nor is it going to be as easy to build Kinich in it. Next to this is the Golden Troop. While the full strength of this set is locked to Kinich being off-field attacking with this skill, which is impossible, the set still gives a nice 45% skill damage increase. While the set is basically inferior to the Codex, if you have a really good set of it, you'll still deal high damage with Kinich. Other than these, you can mix and match any of the 2 sets that increase attack, dendro damage, or skill damage. And a side note for those that may forget, be sure to have one of your teammates run Deepwood Memories for the dendro resistance shred. For those just starting the game, you can either use Berserker for more crit rate, Braveheart for more overall damage, or Gambler for more skill damage. When using these sets, equip an attack sands and then a dendro damage goblet. For the circlet, use either crits. However, if you're going to be using the Obsidian Codex, go for a crit damage circlet instead and try to balance out crit rate with your substats. Speaking of substats, aim for both crits, attack percentage, and then energy recharge. With regard to Constellations and which one is his best, up front I've gotta say that his Constellations are actually broken. They are very strong and really you do well to have any of them, but not that he needs them. Either way, first up is his first Constellation. This will increase his movement speed as he traverses, but most importantly, it will increase his cannon shot's crit damage by 100%. Seeing as his cannon is a massive portion of his damage, the crit rate increase will actually be huge, so this Constellation is a very welcome one. Then comes his second, which is his best, where when his skill hits an enemy, the enemy's dendro resistance is decreased by 30%. This is huge not only for Kinich's damage, but the damage of any other dendro unit you'll be playing alongside him, which you'll likely do. And finally, Kinich's skill is further improved both in AoE and damage. As always, last but not least, his C6 will actually allow for his cannon shot to bounce between enemies, dealing huge amounts of damage. This is great as this would enable for Kinich to attack multiple enemies at once, or at the very least make it easy to do so. Finally, let's get into some exceptional Kinich teams, and with them it's clear that his teams are going to center around Dendro and Pyro. However, there is actually a lot of setups that you can make with this, so here are his best ones. The first team is going to be a burning team, having him with Benny, Emily, and Xiangling. This team is his best as him and Emily are really going to shine in this team. Thanks to Benny, Kinich and Emily and Xiangling are gonna get a huge DPS increase, but especially Kinich as his attack scaling passive is gonna be even stronger than it normally is. His damage in this team is gonna be really impressive, but so will Emily's, who should run 4 Deepwood for both her and Kinich's damage. Emily is also going to reduce the damage she and her team will take from burning, so playing Kinich will be far less of a headache. Lastly, Xiangling will complete this team by providing a consistent source of pyro so that you can easily burn enemies. Now for the second team, it's going to be a more free-to-play version of the last team. Since Benny and Xiangling are 4 stars, they're still going to be used in this team. However, you actually have a lot of options for the second Dendro teammate. You could use Yao Yao or Kale, both of which would use Deepwood. For a more premium but still popular support, you could also use Nahida or Xiangli with 4 tenacity to increase Kinich's attack. For the third team, we're gonna move away from burning and now shift into Burgeon. Seeing as Kinich is gonna use his skill to apply Dendro, Furina is a sure way to apply Hydro. Yelan and Chincho should also still be usable, but anyhow, then Benny will also be used for his attack buff and also to build some of Furina's fanfare stacks. This time around, Diha will be used as the pyro support, and I'm actually glad to say this, that in this team she's actually really good. With her skill, she can easily and effectively trigger Burgeon on or off field. Well everyone, this is my Kinich guide. If you guys enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask me them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and take care.